Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the science of success. So, before we get started, I want to preface this. It's a really difficult reading. It's not terribly long, but it's very dense. And you'll notice that I have two parts of questions, so much to cover. I only included part one here, as you'll notice, but if you go to the file section of class under Unit 1, you'll find the other handout. That deals more with the second half of the reading with Sasumi, and that part I think is really just as equally important to you understanding the importance of this reading. But I decided to just kind of focus on part one since that is really focused on uh, what I think most of you will use, though I will mention the part two as well. So why don't we get into it? Um, so what I'm going to focus on today is question uh, five, and basically um, explaining the difference between this and then this new hypothesis. So in question five, the answer can be found on page two of the handout of the PDF. And basically, what the genetic vulnerability model is looking at these genes that folks may have and looking at them only as a vulnerability. So, if you look up the definition of vulnerability, it's sort of like a weakness. If we think of Achilles' heel, right? Like that's the one weak spot on him, and so a vulnerability is sort of a weakness. So when it says genetic vulnerability, it's looking at these different genetics like as only a weakness, that these can only hurt you. And so this is going to be different from the alternate hypothesis, aka the orchid and dandelion hypothesis, that these genetics are not just a vulnerability, that they're not just a weakness, they can be something else. So that's where we get into the orchid hypothesis. And so the orchid and dandelion hypothesis is that basically some children are more prone or susceptible to the environment. Those would be the orchid kids. And so that they're going to have more of these, um, you know, uh, genetic uh, markers, trying to find the word to describe it, that make them prone to things like, ADHD, depression, high risk taking, things like that. And so in the genetic vulnerability model, they're looking at like heightened risk taking as like, oh, this is only a downside, right? Whereas in the orchid hypothesis, that, that just because someone is more sensitive to the environment doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative. And so that's where the article focuses a lot on these different studies that look at how when people are put in the right environment, like an orchid, that they're able to thrive, and they're not just able to do well, they're able to do better than their peers who are the dandelion kids who can just do good in kind of every environment. And so that's I would say the idea of the orchid hypothesis and how it's different from the genetic vulnerability hypothesis. That's a real key to understanding what this paper's about, this essay is about. And so if you're having trouble trying to figure that out, that's something to maybe bring up on the discussion, because we will be doing a discussion about this particular reading, like I said, because it is just so dense and difficult. The other thing I just wanted to mention about this reading is the work by Sasumi. There's two things I would want to look at here that I think you might want to bring up in your paper. One being the cross fostering study. That's the one where they switched the children at birth, the monkeys, that is, because he did that to humans. That is totally not a moral thing to do, and I think you maybe argue that even doing it to monkeys is a little dicey. But the cross fostering and what happens when the babies are switched in terms of their mothers and what happens to those babies. That's something to look at. The next thing to look at is the coup that happens near the end of the essay. And so in that, just to kind of give you a brief overview, there's the two families, and you have one family led by the matriarch, Cocoa Bean, and this family, in terms of rhesus society, you'll remember from the article they explained that there's a very rigid hierarchy in rhesus monkey colony life, and that the family led by Cocoa Bean has enjoyed the dominant status in that society. And it's only until that the male enforcers and Cocoa Bean's daughter becomes sick that the power balance starts shifting toward the other family, and the other family basically starts a coup to take over as the dominant family. And so the reason I think this is important is it goes back to the marshmallow test reading, Don't the Secret of Self-Control, about if then patterns, right? About how, you know, if there's, this opening in terms of leadership, a vacuum of leadership, then this other family can be more dominant, or how the so basically about how personality and, can change, right, as soon as the environment changes. Another thing I think the coup just kind of explains to us too is just like, about how the importance of family and growing up. And if you're growing up in a family in this rhesus colony where you're kind of enjoying this top status all the time, and then these things happen to make it so it's not this way, obviously things are going to change, right? And so I think that could be another one to kind of look at. But yeah, like I said, I think the key to understanding this article is the difference between the genetic vulnerability model and the ORCID hypothesis. And if you understand the difference between those two and the studies that were used to kind of develop and prove these, I think you'll be able to integrate this into your paper very successfully. So that's what I would be looking at in this particular essay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this, and I can't wait to see what you say about this coming up. Bye.